very simple for you, Dan. Men should not play sports against women. I'm not going to get into all the bullshit that's going on out here in the world today. If anybody think that, I think they're stupid. I'm not, like I say, I support the gay community 100%. I support the transgender community 100%. But I do not, under any circumstances, under zero, think that men should play sports against women. And if anybody have a problem with that, they're going to have to get over it, because I'm not going to change my...
I saw a video of Enes Kanter saying that he's declaring himself as a WNBA prospect. So he posted this on his social media. He said, if simply declaring who you are is all that's required, then I meet every single requirement necessary to compete in the WNBA. And he basically says, based on the current guidelines, I can and am officially declaring my eligibility for the upcoming WNBA draft in April 2027. Like, I don't know whether to laugh. I don't know whether to cry, because like I've said in other videos, this league is the anything but basketball league. The storylines around this league are never about basketball. And I didn't realize what I was signing up for by covering this league to the extent that I have been covering it for the past 3 years. Like, I actually like sports. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about drama and negativity. And it's literally, that's the thing that's in your face.
Charles Barkley looked straight into the camera and basically warned the WNBA that they could be heading toward a legal disaster. And the crazy part is, his argument isn't completely off base. What began as a joke video from a retired NBA center has now turned into one of the league's most chaotic weeks. Lawyers are getting involved, sponsors are starting to feel uneasy, social media comments have erupted into heated arguments, and Barkley is sitting on national television calling the entire situation outrageous. So how did a mock draft announcement turn into a serious crisis for a league that was already struggling to control its own story?
Oh my gosh, it's happening. A former NBA star has now declared himself a prospect for the WNBA. This is Enes Kanter. He is 6'10", 250 pounds. He now says that he has reviewed all of the eligibility requirements and criteria for the WNBA and has decided to declare himself eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft.
Yo, shit just got real, y'all. If this is true, Enes Kanter Freedom said, you know what? It's time for the WNBA to put up or shut up. They want to talk about, they believe inclusivity and exclusion is never the answer, and there's not even a number big enough of people other than women, other than biological women who are playing in women's sports for it to matter, for all this fuss and all this, you know, all these people to be looking at it like a problem. Shit just got real.
Enes Kanter Freedom, the former NBA center known for being pushed out of the league amid his outspoken political views, posted a video declaring himself eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft. He wasn't shouting, joking around, or trying to turn it into a comedy skit. Instead, he delivered a calm, almost legal-sounding statement directly to the camera, the kind of serious tone you'd expect from someone reading an official press release rather than making a video designed to go viral.
Consideration and reviewing the current eligibility guidelines, I am officially declaring myself a WNBA prospect. If simply declaring who you are is all that's required, then I meet every single requirement necessary to compete in the WNBA. My team and I have carefully examined the WNBA's eligibility criteria and governing framework surrounding self-identification and inclusion. Based on the current guidelines, I can and am officially declaring my eligibility for the upcoming WNBA draft in May 2027.
What made Kanter Freedom's move harder to dismiss was that he never presented it as a joke. In the same video, he made that point directly, saying he wasn't there to mock, ridicule, or disrespect any community or anyone's personal choices. Instead, he argued that he was simply asking for the existing rules to be applied equally to everyone. That gave the video a very different tone from a troll account posting something purely for laughs, which is why some outlets found it difficult to treat the story as nothing more than a joke. Kanter Freedom framed the entire situation as a test of fairness, pointing to the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement, which states that only women are eligible, but, as he argued, does not clearly define the term or explain how gender identity affects eligibility. His message was essentially simple. If the door is open, he's going to walk through it, and he's going to do it politely.
I'm transgender. I'm a woman. I identify as sometimes identifying as a woman for purposes of basketball, professional basketball. So I'll be declaring for the WNBA draft in 2027.
Only thing I want to say is what happened to the people that made content, the people that wore t-shirts that wanted men to play with women? Where did they go? I've been looking for them. People at? Where's Cheryl Reeve at with them t-shirts? Where them content creators at, man? This would be such a good idea if Caitlin Clark had him as a teammate. Where all y'all go now? Y'all been real quiet around here, bro. Real quiet. What the hell is going on?
Then things got even more complicated. Just hours after Cantor Freedom's video appeared, former Houston Rockets first-round pick Royce White went on Fox News and made a similar declaration, only this time with a much louder delivery and far less patience for nuance. "I'm transgender. I'm a woman. I identify as sometimes identifying as a woman for the purpose of basketball, professional basketball. So I'll be declaring for the WNBA draft in 2027 as well," White said, sitting completely straight-faced while the anchor beside him tried to determine whether he was watching a satire segment or witnessing an actual legal maneuver.
This could get interesting. Royce White, who is a former NBA player and a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, has decided to declare for the WNBA draft as a transgender individual. And he is testing to see exactly what the left is going to do. Now, I'm sure that many on the left are already going to cry foul over this because he looks, walks, and talks like a man. And I think that this is hopefully going to educate quite a few of them on what we have all been saying regarding this situation. Because this guy is a former NBA player, and it is realistically a situation where if they do accept him, it is going to heavily tilt the scales in favor of whatever team he ends up on. Now, if they end up rejecting him entirely, the left will have proved our point. So this is an interesting trap that the WNBA has been put in, as well as the left in the United States.
Two former NBA players, both standing over 6'8" and both former first-round picks, had suddenly declared themselves eligible for a women's league within the same 24-hour period. Cantor Freedom, for his part, said in follow-up interviews that he was genuinely prepared to show up if the league somehow allowed the situation to go that far, joking that he was already working on his crossover. By that point, this no longer looked like a one-off joke. It was beginning to resemble a coordinated statement, and the internet reacted that way almost immediately.
Are very upset after another NBA player identifies as a woman and is now declaring for the WNBA draft.
I'm transgender. I identify as sometimes identifying as a woman, declaring for the WNBA draft.
So yes, this is very true. We had Enes Freedom make the announcement yesterday, and we now have another former NBA player, Royce White, doing the same thing for the 2027 WNBA draft. Now, like I mentioned, a lot of people are very upset about this, so Royce White responded to this saying, "I haven't even been publicly trans for 72 hours and I'm already getting so much hate. I just want to hoop with my girls in my feminine era. Why can't y'all be happy for me?" Now, because of this, the WNBA announced that they are meeting to review what a woman is after recent events.
The reaction was instant.
The reaction was immediate and seemingly everywhere, spreading across social media, group chats, and eventually mainstream news within a single news cycle. The clips purportedly generated massive numbers of views across platforms, while comment sections turned into full-blown battlegrounds, with people debating far more than basketball. The argument quickly expanded into questions about fairness, identity, and where satire should stop. Some people thought it was one of the funniest things they had seen all year, arguing that it was an effective way to highlight a policy they believed the league had never clearly defined. Others felt that two grown men making jokes about a women's league, even while insisting they were being respectful, crossed a line that shouldn't be used for a punchline. Sponsors, already facing questions surrounding the league's policies involving transgender athletes, purportedly began receiving calls from reporters asking whether they would continue standing behind the WNBA during another major public relations controversy. Some smaller regional sponsors purportedly paused promotional campaigns while they assessed the situation, and at least one national brand was said to have temporarily pulled a scheduled ad rotation. According to people familiar with the league's marketing side,
I do not, under any circumstances, zero, think that men should play sports against women. And if anybody have a problem with that, they're going to have to get over it, because I'm not going to change. I just think it's wrong, period. If people disagree with me, I'm good with that. Hey, we disagree. Yeah. I'm not mad at you. I don't hate you. I'm not going to call you names, because that's just silly and stupid. But I'm never going to think it's all right for men to play sports against women. And I don't even think that's controversial. That's the thing that's funny. Like some of this stuff make, like when you see these debates on television, I'm like, yeah, men shouldn't play sports against women. I'm done. I don't want to hear you try to explain it to me. No, I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to argue with you. Men shouldn't play sports against women. I'm done. There's a lot of we can argue over.
That's when Charles Barkley stepped in, and he absolutely did not hold back. Sitting on Inside the NBA, Barkley called the entire situation outrageous. But what really made people stop and listen was that his frustration wasn't aimed only at Cantor Freedom and White for making the videos. He was also criticizing the WNBA for creating a situation where two former NBA players with legitimate professional resumes could make a serious-sounding argument about why they should be eligible for a women's league in the first place. Barkley's basic point was that the league had created this problem itself by leaving important questions unanswered. If a league spends months refusing to clearly explain who is eligible to compete, he argued, it shouldn't be surprised when people take that ambiguity and push it as far as possible. He also suggested that a straightforward written policy could have prevented much of the controversy, because the lack of clarity created the opening in the first place. And when the discussion turned to whether Cantor Freedom and White should actually be allowed to enter the draft, the response from some commentators was surprisingly simple. If the league wants to be inclusive, then let them enter and see what happens. Another prominent voice, former NFL linebacker Brian Urlacher, also weighed in while defending Sophie Cunningham, describing the issue as one of common sense and arguing that biological differences matter in sports. Urlacher said he struggled to understand why the subject was even being debated, maintaining that men and women should compete in separate sporting categories. Barkley wasn't the only respected sports figure to enter the conversation either. Shaquille O'Neal addressed the controversy on his podcast the following day, describing the situation as both funny and unfortunate, while noting that Cantor Freedom and White had forced a national conversation that many people had been avoiding. Urlacher also questioned why so much of the anger was directed at the people delivering the message instead of the underlying issue they were raising, a comment that quickly spread across sports media. Kendrick Perkins took a more measured position on ESPN, saying he could understand why some players felt the videos were disrespectful, but also arguing that simply dismissing the underlying question wouldn't make it disappear. In his view, the league needed to provide a real answer, rather than another carefully worded statement filled with vague references to respect and inclusion.
I had to come out and say it. I'm transgender. And I'd like to pursue a career in the WNBA in all women's sports. I mean, pick one. But the WNBA is probably most suitable. I just, for me, personally, I hear a lot of people talk about us, transgenders, as sort of enigma. But nobody's really willing to just say, no, we're not doing it. We're done. Fuck off. And, why wouldn't I continue to pursue a WNBA career until the day when people finally put some guardrails back around common sense, logic, reason, the truth.
To understand why this controversy hit so hard, you have to go back a few weeks before any of this began. The entire debate started when Fever guard Sophie Cunningham gave a straightforward interview response, saying she wanted to protect young girls in sports and didn't believe biological men should compete against women. That one comment quickly triggered a much larger reaction across the league, with players and coaches taking opposing sides in real time through television appearances and social media posts. Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeve became one of the most outspoken figures on the other side of the debate, publicly and repeatedly expressing her support for trans inclusion in the league. At one point, she even wore a shirt reading "Trans kids belong courtside" during a nationally televised game against Cunningham's team.
So, my views, as I said last week, I come from a space of inclusion, and the narrative that I think that is problematic is to suggest that, number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. And I think this is what's bothersome, is that there's a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive issue. We have some issues. Number one, we need to protect trans kids. Every kid, to me, it's a human rights issue. Every kid has a right to sports, regardless of gender diverse, transgender. Every kid has the right to access. Now, what gets nuanced is, when you're beyond puberty, when you're an Olympic sport, when you have scholarships and that sort of thing. That's where I say that common sense people get together and you find common ground to find a way to be inclusive. The answer.
Reeve didn't back away from her position once the cameras were rolling. She told reporters, "I come from a space of inclusion," before arguing that the idea of transgender athletes being the biggest threat to women's sports was the wrong narrative. She emphasized the need to protect trans kids and described the issue as a human rights matter, saying every child should have the opportunity to participate in sports. Coming just one day before Cunningham's team arrived in town, those remarks became an important part of the argument made by people like Cantor Freedom and White, who maintained that they weren't simply targeting a women's league for attention. Their response was essentially this: if the league is going to embrace self-identification as the standard, then that standard should apply consistently to everyone who makes that declaration, rather than only to the people the league considers acceptable.
You are Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx. That is an irresponsible thing to do. You are a coach for a female basketball team. Do you not think that the females are being screwed over if they have to compete against an individual born as a male? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You trying to tell me that a college player for the men at a college program anywhere in the country, or an NBA player should transition to being a woman and be allowed to compete in the WNBA? Or on a collegiate level to a women's college program? Whether it's UConn, South Carolina, Iowa, Tennessee, or wherever else you want to come up with. What the hell are you talking about?
Stephen A. Smith joined the debate as well, and he was anything but gentle about it. During nearly 15 minutes on his own show, he strongly criticized Reeve for wearing the shirt, arguing that the decision was irresponsible because it failed to consider how it could affect the WNBA's overall image and potentially alienate a large portion of the American public. Smith emphasized a point that has continued to surface throughout the broader sports debate. Someone can support the rights of transgender people while also believing that biological differences matter when it comes to competition in professional women's sports. In his view, those positions are not automatically contradictory, despite how often the issue is presented that way online. It was essentially the same argument Barkley would make days later, only delivered with Smith's trademark volume and intensity. And that helps explain why the two commentators, despite having very different personalities and styles, ultimately found themselves reaching a similar conclusion.
You see how much of a mess this is becoming, right? And everybody want to act like, oh my goodness, we don't want to hate on trans. We don't want to hate on trans folks. That's not what that's about. Anybody who's hating on them should be ashamed of themselves. The WNBA, the NBA, and everybody else in between is absolutely right when they talk about not violating people's civil rights and liberties, not being hateful, not engaging in hate in any way, shape, form, or fashion, whether verbally, physically, or otherwise. We all know that. But what Enes Kanter is pointing to is about competition. So for somebody to transition from male to female, and for folks to act like it would be okay for them to participate in the WNBA is ridiculous.
Outside the arenas, the divide started showing up in a completely different way. Fans began arriving at WNBA games carrying signs that referenced Kanter freedom and white videos. Some treated the whole thing as satire and held signs celebrating the controversy, while others demanded that the league protect women's sports, using language taken directly from the Cunningham debate weeks earlier. A few arenas reportedly increased security for road games involving teams whose coaches had been especially vocal on either side of the argument. Even local news stations that rarely covered the WNBA began sending crews to the venues specifically to capture the reactions from fans outside, rather than focusing only on what happened on the court.
BPA represents 200+ individual people with different lived experiences, cultures, lifestyles, and opinions. We embrace justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those are the values that unite this union and allow it to protect women's sports while creating transformational change. Transformational change? Hate, abuse, and demonization of any person or group of people, including transgender people, only fuel fear, division, and harm. We will continue to have hard conversations, but we will not be used as political pawns. Support the players, support the fans. At games, notify security if you witness hateful, violent, or abusive behavior. Only report abusive posts and drown out the bots and bad actors. At home, tell your elected officials to strengthen Title IX.
Now, here's where the talk of lawsuits actually enters the picture. The WNBA Players Association pushed back strongly, releasing a statement condemning what it described as hate, abuse, and the demonization of the transgender community, language that was clearly aimed at the increasingly heated reaction spreading across social media. Reports then suggested that the league was considering possible legal responses to the videos, with critics describing them as attempts to disrupt the league and damage its reputation during an already tense season. At the same time, legal commentators pointed out the central contradiction at the heart of the controversy. If the league attempted to take legal action against two men for following what they believed were its own stated principles around self-identification, it would potentially have to explain in detail what those rules actually mean. And that is precisely the question the league had faced repeatedly from reporters. Barkley summed up the dilemma by arguing that the WNBA could not have it both ways, because trying to punish two people for taking the league's stated position literally could create even more negative attention rather than resolving the controversy. Other voices pushed back from the opposite direction, arguing that the entire episode was less about genuine eligibility and more about using a politically charged issue to provoke a reaction. From that perspective, Kanter Freedom and Royce White were never seriously expecting roster spots. The point was to pressure the league into addressing a question that had become increasingly difficult to avoid. Their supporters argued that they were using the league's own language to force a clearer conversation about eligibility, identity, and inclusion. Reeve had publicly emphasized inclusion, and now two former NBA players were effectively asking the league to explain exactly how those principles would apply when challenged directly. That put the WNBA in an uncomfortable position, because every new interview or statement risked extending the controversy instead of ending it. Critics of Kanter Freedom, meanwhile, argued that he was not actually transgender and accused him of using a culture war issue to regain relevance, while defenders maintained that his personal identity was not the point of the argument at all. That disagreement only added another layer to an already complicated debate. There was also a quieter irony underneath the entire situation. Cantor Freedom built much of his post-NBA public profile around challenging institutions and speaking out on issues he believed were important, even when doing so created professional consequences. Now, he was applying that same confrontational instinct to a completely different sports organization, pushing it to explain its position publicly. Whether people agreed with his approach or not, the tactic had clearly succeeded in generating attention. Reporters who had previously struggled to get direct answers about eligibility were now asking much more pointed questions because the controversy had made the subject impossible to ignore. On the other side, critics argued that the attention itself was disproportionate, pointing out that transgender participation in professional sports involves relatively few athletes compared with the overall number of competitors. They viewed the controversy as another example of a broader political fight over transgender rights rather than a major basketball issue. Supporters of that view argued that debates over transgender athletes are often amplified far beyond their actual impact on sports, while opponents maintained that fairness and competitive categories are legitimate subjects for public discussion. And that brings the story back to the question that started all of this. Whether the WNBA ever faces an actual courtroom battle over the controversy, or whether the entire episode eventually fades as the news cycle moves on, one thing is already clear. The debate has become much bigger than two former NBA players making a provocative declaration. Charles Barkley publicly gave voice to an argument that many people had already been debating privately, and once he did, other major sports personalities joined the conversation. Sponsors are watching, lawyers and commentators are discussing the possible consequences, fans are taking sides both online and outside arenas, and the actual basketball has increasingly been pushed into the background. That may ultimately be the most striking part of the entire controversy. A story that began with a mock draft declaration has managed to overshadow the sport itself.